Now we've got the White House Chief of Staff, Ron Klain. Thanks so much for coming back on.
Thanks for having me.
So a ton has happened in the last couple of weeks. So let's jump in. On the Inflation Reduction Act, you've got a bill that reduces the deficit, lowers inflation, shores up U.S. energy, lowers prescription drug costs for seniors. All things that Republicans ostensibly support or have claimed to support in the past, and yet they've all refused to support this bill. What's your message to those Republicans who are basically broadcasting right now that trying to hurt Joe Biden is more important than helping Americans?
Well, Brian, I think it's even more than that. Look, I think that what we've seen over the past few weeks in Washington is a very clear choice between one political party that's willing to stand up to the special interests, it's willing to take on special interests who've had their way in Washington for decades, whether that's passing gun safety legislation and taking on the NRA, or this Inflation Reduction Act, where we took on the big drug companies that have been able for decades to block legislation to allow Medicare to negotiate for prescription drugs, a common sense idea. They've been able to block it. The big corporations who have blocked the idea of even a minimum tax for big corporations, profitable corporations. Some of the biggest corporations in America pay no taxes at all. How can that be? It's because the big corporate lobby has lobbied the Congress and been able to prevent that from being changed. You saw the president's taking on the oil companies. We got the price of gas coming down. The point here is that the president and his allies in Congress have made it very clear they're willing to stand up to and beat these special interests and pass laws. And the Republicans simply aren't. They weren't willing to take on the drug companies and bring down the prescription drugs. They weren't willing to take on the big corporations and say, hey, you have to pay some taxes. They weren't willing to take on the other special interests involved in trying to defeat this Inflation Reduction Act. And so I think that's the difference you're seeing, Brian. You're seeing one party that says, you know what, enough's enough. It's time for the American people to get their way in Washington. They fought for that. They fought hard. I don't think people should underestimate how hard it was to overcome the power of these lobbies, these interests in Washington. That's what the Democrats did in passing this bill. And that's why I think it's such a game changer going forward.
I think it's important to note, too, to watch what these people do. Don't listen to what they say. One specific aspect of the Inflation Reduction Act is its climate provisions. Yes. Climate is my biggest issue as someone who's still, young, kind of young, who pretends to be young. I've got a TikTok, so maybe that makes me young. Maybe it makes me old that I'm acknowledging that I have a TikTok. In any case, that's the part of the bill that I was most proud of. Obviously, the White House didn't get everything that it wanted on climate, and previous iterations of reconciliation did allocate more funding. But can you speak about how this bill will hit the White House's targets on climate?
Yeah, Brian, I do think that's probably the most historic part of this bill and the one perhaps with the most long-run significance. The president ran for president on the idea that we were going to transition to a clean energy future and that we were going to tackle this existential challenge of climate change. He set last year a goal that we would reduce our emissions by 50% in the years ahead. This bill gets us almost all the way there. It doesn't get us all the way there. We have to be honest about that, but it will produce a 40% emissions reduction. Now, that would be just an enormous change in the right direction. I think some of the leaders on fighting for climate action in Congress have said that not only is this the most significant climate change fighting legislation ever passed in this country, it's actually the most significant one ever to be passed in the world. It would make the largest investment anywhere in a transition to a clean energy economy. And it does it in a way that I think creates a lasting support for that by creating jobs, by saying the way we're going to fight climate change is by putting Americans to work, building solar panels and windmills, new electric vehicles, batteries for those new electric vehicles, and the whole array of things, energy efficient appliances. I could go on and on and on. The point here is that this is a clean energy future that's not about punishing people or hurting people, but it's about creating opportunity in America, jobs in America, transitioning to that future, making us a richer country, making us a stronger country, and of course, reducing our emissions by 40%. And I think that is historic. I think that is something that people will look back on for years and years and years and point to this moment as a really critical turning point in the struggle against climate change.
Yeah, that's well said. And aside from the Inflation Reduction Act, we also are coming off of a last couple of weeks with a massive jobs report, 50-year low unemployment rate, the CHIPS Act, the PACT Act, the leader of Al-Qaeda killed. It's been, a long slog, but any president would be hard pressed to have had a week this good. But at the same time, there's still work to do on Biden's poll numbers. So what's the strategy to bridge that divide and capitalize on what is objectively the best couple weeks you could have in politics so that Biden's favorability more closely resembles the popularity of the agenda that's being passed right now?
As you say, it has been a great couple weeks here. 50-year low on unemployment, just to be clear on that, and record job creation. As you said, successful mission against Zawahiri. And not just this amazing inflation bill, which also fights climate change, but the CHIPS Act, which is also going to help fight inflation by bringing down the price of things made with semiconductors, and the burn pits legislation, so critical to our veterans. It's been a fantastic stretch here. Look, I think we pass legislation not to make the president's polls better, but to make the country better, to make the world better, and that's what we've done. I think what voters want to see is that we continue to make progress on these things. One other thing that's happened in the past few weeks is the price of gasoline has come down at the pump, down almost $1 since the start of the summer, down below $3.99 on a national average and below $3.79 in most pumps in America. And I think that's also going to make people feel better about the economy. Gas is something, it's kind of a bellwether for how people feel about the economy. But fundamentally, Brian, if we're talking about elections and poll numbers and whatnot, again, I want to be careful here because I'm covered by the Hatch Act. I'm in the White House. But what I will say is what we've seen over the past couple of weeks, elections are a choice. And both Democrats and Republicans have made the choice they're offering to voters incredibly clear. Democrats have said, hey, we're going to take on the special interests on behalf of families. We're going to take on the special interests. We're going to take on the oil industry, the big corporations, the gun lobby, and try to bring down costs and make the country safer and do these things. Republicans have said, no, we're not going to do that. In fact, Republicans over the past weekend, when they voted on this bill, voted against a $35 a month cap on insulin to stand with the drug companies, not with the millions of families that need insulin to treat children or a loved one or someone in their family. So that difference, that choice, who the Democrats are standing for and delivering results for, who the Republicans are standing with, I think that's the fundamental choice we're going to see. Democrats on the Hill call it people, not politics. You can put whatever label you want on it, whatever slogan you want on it. I think we've had an epic demonstration of the choice both sides offer. And I think that difference is the difference that the American people are going to see more and more clearly over the weeks ahead.
That's actually a perfect segue into this next question, and that has to do with Kansas, which, for all intents and purposes is a red state. Voters came out in pretty staggering numbers to make their voices heard and protect abortion rights. And yet still, Republicans across the country are going all in on abortion bans. They're trying to restrict interstate travel, criminalize doctors, ban contraception. If Kansas has told us anything, it's that this issue has potency, not just with Democrats. So what's your message to those folks who aren't Democrats, who may never have voted for a Democrat, but people who recognize the importance of protecting Americans' bodily autonomy? What's your message to those people?
My message to those people is, again, the difference is extremely clear. We have a Republican Party that intends to pass legislation to restrict these fundamental choices. These choices, this question of freedom and autonomy, not just around reproductive rights, but around marriage equality and other issues of personal freedom. We saw my home state's in Indiana. We saw this past week in Indiana, the state passed the first post-Dobbs abortion ban that wasn't in existence before Dobbs came down. And we saw there was Republicans in the state that are driving this to passage. Look, I think that, as you say, this does transcend party, but we have only one party that's driving this agenda, and that's the Republican Party. Republican leaders in Washington said that if they get control of the Congress, they will press for a national abortion ban. And so it won't matter what state you live in, Congress will try to pass a ban on all abortions. Now, the good news is Joe Biden's going to be president. If Congress somehow passes it, he'll veto that. Better news would be if we had a Democratic House and Senate next year, we could actually pass a law that would protect women in all 50 states. We could pass a law that would turn Roe versus Wade back into the law of the land where it was before the Dobbs decision and protect people's reproductive rights wherever you live. So what I would say to people is that there is a big difference here between the two parties' positions. Democrats are working hard to protect reproductive rights. Republicans are working hard to take them away. And if that's something you care about, and it's clear that for millions and millions and millions of Americans, it is something they care about passionately, then they need to make their voices heard.
I want to dig into this idea of the makeup of Congress. There's obviously a lot at stake in this upcoming election, and either Democrats will hang on to their majorities in both chambers, or they'll lose, the House or the Senate. What does a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate look like versus divided government? Can you paint a picture of the next 2 years with those two scenarios?
Well, sure. I think I do want to start with this issue of reproductive rights, because I think that's in some ways the most dramatic and immediate one, Brian. If we have enough Democrats in the Senate who are committed to codifying Roe, committed to overcoming the filibuster to codify Roe, as President Biden is, then we can pass a law that settles this debate and anchors it into the law of the land. It puts us back to where we were before Dobbs, and really makes a hallmark for individual freedom. If, on the other hand, we have a Republican House and Senate, which I don't think we will, but if we do, they will pass a bill to try to ban abortion rights. And President Biden will veto it. But if they could ever get a Republican president, it would be signed into law. It'd be the law of the land the opposite way. So that's one clear difference. There's obviously differences on economic issues. Let's talk about that. You saw in the Inflation Reduction Act, Democrats fighting to bring the cost of prescription drugs down and to allow people on Medicare to have less out-of-pocket expenses, cap those out-of-pocket expenses at $2,000 a year for their drugs. What are the Republicans fighting for? Senator Scott, who's the chair of the Republican Campaign Committee, says he wants to put Medicare and Social Security on a clock where they'd expire in 5 years with nothing to replace them. There just couldn't be a sharper difference on those critical issues. We've heard some Republicans talking about moving Social Security. Senator Johnson from Wisconsin says Social Security should be a discretionary program. That means even though it's not discretionary that you pay into Social Security, people pay in their entire lives. They don't have any choice about that. Congress would then choose later on whether or not you get your benefits. That's not something we're for as Democrats. So I think we could go down the line, whether it's voting rights or a whole array of other issues. The differences between these two parties is as clear as day. And obviously, that's the difference we want the American people to focus on.
I want to circle back to one issue that you spoke about earlier. For months, we've heard Republicans blaming the White House for high gas prices and inflation. And now gas prices have dropped basically every day for 60 days. And the New York Fed survey of consumer inflation expectations registered its biggest drop ever. How has it been juggling all of those phone calls from Republicans thanking you guys for solving the issues that they decided that you guys own? Has Kevin McCarthy called to say congratulations multiple times or just once?
Well, as you might expect, Brian, those calls have been few and far between. That's fine.
Yeah.
Look, I don't care about phone calls. What we care about here at the White House is delivering results for the American people. And inflation is too high, and families are squeezed. There's no question about that. By the way, families were squeezed for decades. For decades, we've had people living paycheck to paycheck. And President Biden came here with a very different approach. He said, we're going to put in place an economic strategy that grows the economy from the bottom up and the middle out. And that's what we've been working on for 18 months. And the first place you've seen progress is in the area of jobs. As you said before, we have the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years. People can find jobs now, and wages are up. But we need to go farther. We need to make sure that people who want to join a union can join a union. We need to make sure that the things that we need in America, we're making in America, that manufacturing continues to improve. People thought manufacturing could never come back. And under President Biden, we've added 650,000 manufacturing jobs so that we're making things here in this country again. We need to then get prices down. We got, as you said, the price of gasoline is coming down, but food prices are still too high. We need to work on that. There's a lack of competition in many aspects of the food industry. Farmers are not ripping off American consumers. Farmers are not getting rich when food prices are high. It's the food processors and the intermediaries. We need to have more competition there. So we've got a lot of work to do. We've made a lot of improvements on the supply chain. We need to make more improvements on the supply chain. And of course, most importantly, most immediately, we have to get the Inflation Reduction Act signed into law. My point is this. It's not that there isn't more work to do. There is. It's that Democrats are doing the work and Republicans are giving speeches and have no answers. At the very least, they should just get out of the way and let us pass this agenda to bring inflation down. Instead, they spent a whole weekend fighting against lower insulin costs, fighting against big corporations paying their fair share, fighting against deficit reduction. So there's a choice here. And what I can tell you is our jobs are not done. Inflation is still too high, but we have a plan to bring it down. We are making progress on that plan. Gas prices first, other things to follow. And we're going to continue fighting for working families and for helping those families that live paycheck to paycheck in this country.
Let's finish off with this. And I saved the most important issue for last year, the dark Brandon memes. They've sprouted up as like, I don't even know how I explain this. This is when I know I have to log off of Twitter. They've sprouted up to represent President Biden's like second coming, his resurgence, as the White House has been kicking ass these last couple of weeks, and he's got glowing eyes. And anyway, has the president seen the dark Brandon memes? And please, if you can, walk me through how this phenomenon was explained to the president of the United States.
Well, the president's seen the images. Look, I think I think all I could say is this. We've had a couple very strong summer here at the White House that's premised on the president standing up very strong to special interests, standing up strong to terrorists, standing up strong for freedom in Ukraine, standing up strong to standing up strong to the gun lobby, as I mentioned, and go down the line. And if what people are recognizing is that strength, and that strength coming through and the victories that strength produces, and they want to recognize it by tweeting or by posting images or even by posting an image of him with his eyes turned red or whatever, I think the important thing is not what the viral image is. I think what's important is the idea. And the idea is that people want to see their president stand tough to these special interests, stands tough to the opponents of freedom. That's what they're seeing. That's what they're recognizing. And however people choose to express it, that's the important thing.
Very diplomatic answer with that one. Ron Klain, thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Brian. I appreciate it.